Hello friends. Today I'm going to show you how I altered a 10 by 8 Allie Edwards album down to a 6 by 8 album. As you see, I've already done the back part of the album, but today I'm going to actually show you how I altered the front part of the album. It's the same process for front and back. First thing I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to measure 4 inches from the front lining, not from the edge of the album, but the actual inside lining. I want to mark 4 inches off. Then I'm going to actually draw a line so that way I can cut directly on that line of where to trim off the inside lining. I like using a utility knife more than I do an X-Acto. It helps later on when I'm trying to actually pull off some of this lining. Um, I'm going to do some shallow cuts. I don't want to cut too deep into the album, but I do want to cut through the paper and at least one layer of the cardboard part of the album. This is where I actually like having a utility knife. It lets me slide the knife underneath the paper and lets me grab a little bit of the cardboard. This stops the paper from peeling when you start to peel it back. If you have some of the cardboard with it, it will actually keep it thick enough as to not tear. And do go slowly. If you pull too fast or too hard, you will still tear the paper and the cardboard. You will see that I am using the utility knife to help pull back some more of that paper. Anytime I feel that the paper is not giving away enough, I use the utility knife to dig further into the cardboard so I can get a nice pull. You don't need to pull the lining back too far, maybe a half inch or to an inch, just enough that you have room when you do the outer cover that you can fold it under the lining. Here you can see I'm about a half inch or so pulled back. Now I'm going to measure 4 inches from the actual edge of the album. On the original album, you could see that there is a very small, almost eighth of an inch lip between the lining and the edge. And rather than measuring that out, I find that it's better to measure directly from the edge of the album. Again, I'm going to draw an actual line through here so I can follow it with my utility knife later. Now this time when I cut, I'm going to cut deeper into the album, but you don't want to cut all the way through. You still want to make slow, shallow cuts as to not cut the front paper. You're just trying to cut back enough of the cardboard so that you can peel it away from the front paper. I'm going to peel back this lining a bit just so I can have a little more of the front paper. It's already folded over on an edge. So I would like to keep that so I can keep the corners nice and crisp. So you see that I'm cutting the front cover paper just enough so that I'll have extra to fold over when I round those corners. Again, do be extra careful with your utility knife so that you don't cut yourself. You don't need a whole lot to round these corners, so you only need about a ½ inch extra, which is why I'm not pulling it all the way off. You do want to make sure to cut through in the very edges of your album so that you can pull it back. I'm going to cut through just a little bit more through this cardboard. What I want to do is rather than peel it away, I almost want to fold it. So rather than peel it away, I'm going to slowly fold it. I probably didn't go as deep as I needed to. As you see here, I'm going to go just a little bit more, but you don't want to slice through the front. So I'm going to slowly pull the cardboard away from the paper. And do be slow about this. You don't want to peel the paper. Now, I don't need much more than this, so rather than pull or rip something, I am actually going to trim off this bit. Because again, I don't need more than a half inch or less to round over. Now I'm going to scrape away some of this cardboard because I didn't cut through enough. But again, I didn't want to cut the front, and it's easier to scrape away a little bit more of this cardboard so you can get a nice flush edge. And I'm going to cut away because this did take a while. And we'll come back once I've gotten most of this removed. So now that I've cleaned up as much of that cardboard as I could, I'm going to work on the corners. To make sure my rounded corners, just there, it's just on the edges, but it's to make sure I can round the corners perfectly. And then I'm going to round the corners by cutting off just a small bit. I have found you don't have to round it really. Just cutting off a small corner allows you enough to wrap the paper so it's rounded. And unfortunately, my head got in the way as I was cutting off that small bit of a corner. But there. You can see here better. I'm just cutting off a small bit of the corner. so I can round it. Now, so I'm using Scotch Quick Dry Tacky Adhesive. It's acid free to glue these edges. Now in the corners, you're going to see I make a slight bit of a mistake. I tear a piece of this off, unfortunately. But you only need two small strips to round the corners. So you cut the corner out, but leave a very, very small bit to round the corners and they will overlap. Here you will see I accidentally tore it off. The good news is the glue will work and help glue it back on. Make sure your pieces are covered with enough glue. You don't want it saturated, but you do want full coverage on these. When you fold them over, you might find that they are a bit long, so you may need to trim them a little. Like I said, I made a mistake with mine. The good news, it's small enough you can't really notice. Now, I do use clips to make sure I get good adhesive. You do not want to use the clips directly on the album. You will leave indentations. A strip of cardboard, you notice I'm using my metal ruler, something to make sure that you're not leaving indents. I'm also making sure not to be clipping the lining paper. I'm just clipping the cover. I do let the glue set here for about an hour just so I can get a nice tight seal. Even though it is quick dry, I do like to have a complete seal before I move on. Again, just fixing my mistake by putting a little more glue in that corner to make sure it holds. I am using a bone folder to make sure my mistake is nice and flush where it was. Thankfully, when I do the top one, I don't actually tear it. So again, you just need two small bits to be able to fold over each other around that rounded corner. I'm finding they are too long, so I'm trimming them back. And I will fold these both under my lining and make sure I get full coverage on that rounded corner I have made. While the glue will dry quickly, I want to make sure it is fully set before I move on to anything else. Corners are nice and rounded. It's now to work on folding the rest of the cover in. I'm going to use a bone folder to make sure that I get nice sharp edges for where my folds are going to be. Bone folders are nice because they don't actually scrape the pattern. I wouldn't use anything metal or anything that's got too sharp of an edge. You don't want to scrape the paper and ruin the pattern. As I'm folding it over, I'm realizing that my cover is a little too long to fit under my lining paper. So I'm going to trim some of this off. It's still quite not right, so I'm going to trim just a little more off. Remove that small bit of lining paper that I forgot to remove earlier. And we're going to glue. I like the tip on this bottle. It helps get glue where you need it to. It also washes off your hands with soap and water pretty well. And then I'm going to use my finger actually to smear that so I get good coverage all the way up to the edge. I don't want anything peeling off of this. I'm going to quickly wipe my hands off since I don't want to get this glue on the outside paper or the lining paper. Then I'm going to tuck the outer cover paper under the lining. And I am again going to use the cardboard and the ruler to help sandwich that paper. So when I put clips in, I don't dent anything and it keeps everything nice and even. I'm making sure to put all my clips and everything under the lining paper. As I haven't glued it yet, I don't want any of the glue that might seep out to hit the lining. Now, I probably overdid it on clamps here, but I have all of these clamps, so I used them. You could probably get away with a few less clamps. And then I will let that dry for an hour or so before I come back to this. Now that it's dry, I can come back and I can glue the lining. As you can see, I left some dents on the cork on the ruler. I will very carefully round the corners of the lining because it was rounded on the original album. Um, I make very small little cuts to the corners till it is rounded. It doesn't take a whole lot. It is a it is barely rounded on the lining paper. I'm actually putting the glue on the lining paper itself. And like I did with the front paper, I will smooth it out with my finger to make sure I get good coverage. I don't want it too thick because I also don't want it to seep out. You just want a nice thin layer to make sure you get good adhesive. Then I will use my clamp system again, this time on the whole lining. I'm not using the cork side of the ruler because I found when I did a test on a different album that the cork pattern actually was being pressed into the cardboard. And I didn't want that, so I'm using the smooth side of the ruler. I will let this dry for another hour before I come back and remove the clips. Everything is all dried. And we have a completed 6 by 8 album. I hope you enjoyed this how-to video, and I hope you have a wonderful day.